Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Today we are going to continue with the Greek mythology. And last time I read the part about the Titans and the main gods, but as you may know, there are many other myths that Greek mythology has, and I will be diving into those today. So let's just start. The first myth that we're going to read today is about Prometheus. He bound cunning Prometheus in unescapable feathers. Prometheus helps mankind. Zeus's victory in the war with the Titans had been hard won, but decisive. He and his brothers held unchallenged sway over the heavens, earth, and sea. The usurper of usurper, he had seized supremacy by dethroning Cronus, who had himself toppled the tyrant Uranus. No ruler could afford to become complacent, however seemingly unassailable their position, and a challenge to the authority of Zeus was fast approaching. Spirit of rebellion. Prometheus, a young titan and therefore a survivor of the old regime, was the son of Iapetus and Clymene, celebrated for quick intelligence, dexterity, and skills. Prometheus's very name meant thinking ahead. He was an inventor and a strategist. Different sources disagree on the precise part Prometheus played in the continuing struggle between Zeus and his subjects. Despite this, all sources regard him as a central part of the conflict. Self-confident in his cleverness, Prometheus was independent-minded, irreverent, and defiant. His contempt for Zeus's authority was all too clear. Worse still, he appeared to pass on this rebellious spirit to Zeus's human subjects. From clay to stone. According to Apollodorus' library, Prometheus was the creator of humanity, shaping the first man and woman from moist clay. This first race of humans walked the earth from only a single generation before being swept away by an angry Zeus in a worldwide flood. Prometheus's human son Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha were the only survivors. Typically, Prometheus had outmaneuvered Zeus, prompting his son and his daughter-in-law to save themselves by building a floating wooden chest in which to ride out of deluge. Deucalion survived the great flood and its aftermath by showing more tact than his father. He thanked Zeus for letting him and Pyrrha live, built an altar, and offered sacrifice. Zeus was so pleased to see this submissive spirit that he not only allowed Deucalion and Pyrrha to go on living, but told Deucalion how he could recreate humanity. He and his wife were told to pick up stones and throw them backwards over their heads. They did so, and whenever Deucalion's stone landed, the bodies of living men immediately took form. Where Pyrrha's came to rest, women sprang out of the ground. A trick backfires. Unlike Apollodorus, Hesiod's genealogy incorporated mortal humans almost from the beginning, though he said little about their origins. They were mentioned as existing during the reign of Cronus, but only incidentally, emerging into the foreground only in the age of the Olympian gods. When Zeus summoned humans for a meeting on a sort of sacrifice they would have to offer him, Prometheus intervened on their behalf, wrapping some choice beef inside an ugly ox hide and a bundle of bones inside some of the most delicious meat. He offered Zeus the choice of which sacrifices should be made to him. Thenceforth, Zeus appeared to have fallen for the trick, asking for the outwardly appealing bag of bones. The Hesiod, hence the king of the gods, may have chosen this deliberately, to have an excuse for hating humans. Either way, Zeus was enraged. Far from easing people's plight as he had intended, Prometheus's cunning made them victims of Zeus's rage. The angry god hid the secret of fire from his human subjects. This not only deprived them of warmth and comfort, but also hindered human progress. Out in the cold. Without fire on or the technologies it makes possible, mortals existed in a miserable state of subsistence. They foraged for food in darkness, damp and cold, with only animal skins for clothes, surviving on raw roots, berries, and fruits when they were in season, and uncooked carrion. They used twigs and rudimentary tools and old bones for weaponry, in what could scarcely be qualified even as a primitive existence. As they fought a daily battle to stave off starvation, any possibility of shaping their wider destiny was unthinkable. Stolen fire. Prometheus came to humanity's rescue. He took some glowing embers from a blaze built by the gods high up on Mount Olympus, and, secreting this fire inside a hollow fennel stalk, he carried it down to the little encampments where mortal men and women shivered on the plains below. Soon, visible from afar, fires twinkled across the length and breadth of the peopled world. In that moment, human life was instantly and permanently transformed. Heat, warmth, light, and safety from predatory beasts was just the start. In no time and at all, mankind began to thrive, smelting metal, fashioning the finest jewelry and the strongest tools, blacksmithing all kinds of weapons, from hoes and hammers to spears and swords. Each new innovation opened the way to others, and suddenly humanity was progressing at a breakneck pace. Zeus was enraged by Prometheus's theft of fire. Not only had he been defied in the most public way, but his power over humanity had been significantly weakened. Zeus decided that Prometheus deserved an eternal and painful punishment. He had the thief seized by his henchmen, Bia, violence, and Kratos, power, and carried to a high mountain peak. Here, with the help of Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, they chained Prometheus to a rock. An eagle flew down, tore at his abdomen, then pulled out the living, pulsing liver and gorged on it. Despite the agony of this torture, it was no more than a beginning for the rebellious Titan. Each night his internal organs and his skin grew back, ready to be attacked afresh by the eagle the next day. For centuries, Prometheus was tied to the rock. He was finally rescued from this torment by Heracles. who found him while hunting for the elusive apples of the Hesperides. Prometheus would only give Heracles the apple's location after he killed the eagle and set Prometheus free. Prometheus was not the only one punished for stealing fire from the gods. Zeus also inflicted his rage upon humankind, instructing Hephaestus to create the woman Pandora to punish the humans by bringing them hardship, war, and death. And so it takes us to the next chapter, which is about Pandora. Her impulse introduced sorrow and mischief to the lives of men. Pandora's box. In Hesiod's account of humanity's mythic origins, works, and days, man was first created alone, with no female mate to accompany him on his journey through the world. Woman would make her first appearance not as a man's helpmate or partner, but as his punishment. A jealous god. When the Titan Prometheus stole fire from the gods, he did much to empower humanity at high personal cost. In an existence that had been largely trouble-free, humanity to whom he gave the gift of fire continued to thrive and prosper. In punishment, however, Prometheus would be held captive and tortured internally at the hands of Zeus, who was a jealous and grudging deity. Far from rejoicing in man's improving fortunes, the god felt threatened by humanity's growing confidence. Zeus concluded that in order to correct the balance between divine and human power, some great calamity in the world was required. That calamity was a woman. On Zeus's orders, the blacksmith and the fire god Hephaestus set to work, shaping soft clay into a female mate for a man, gilding the lily. The other Olympians then added their own contributions to the woman's makeup. Aphrodite gave her beauty and attractiveness. Athena gave her skill of sewing. Hera gave her curiosity, and so on. Hermes, the god's messenger, gave woman the power of speech to help her communicate, but he also gave her the dangerous gift of guile. This new woman was enchanting in her beauty, seductive in her softness, inspiring in her smile, and soothing in her gentleness. In light of these traits, she was given a name, Pandora, literally meaning all gifts. Her name alone would have caused Prometheus concern. He had previously warned his brother Epimetheus not to accept any offerings from Zeus in case it unleashed some evil thing for mortal man. However, due to the punishment of Prometheus, Epimetheus had been left in charge in the world of man, whereas Prometheus's name meant thinking ahead or foresight, Epimetheus's meant thinking after. He was gullible and did not stop to think when Zeus's messenger, Hermes, presented him with Pandora as a goodwill present to humanity from Zeus. Nor did he give a second glance to the present that she herself brought with her, a pithos or ceramic jar, usually reimagined as a richly ornamented box in modern retellings. The all-gifted girl was both a gift and a giver. Fatal curiosity. There was nothing inherently evil about Pandora, although she had been warned against opening the python. It was her innocent curiosity, itself a characteristic given by Hera, that led to her downfall. When she could not resist peeping inside the jar, she pulled back the lid. All the ills and misfortunes of the world flew out. Hunger, sickness, loss, loneliness, and death. Horrified, Pandora hastily pushed the lid back on, just in time to prevent Hope from escaping. With hope, the world could still preserve, despite the adversity that the jealous Zeus had inflicted on the mankind. So there we go. Our girl Pandora did a bit of a mess. But I think it is curious that the woman was created to be, again, a troublemaker and was kind of independently created with much more gifts from all the gods, even though some of them, again, might not be considered gifts, but I like that. Anyway, next we have a very big chapter that deserves its own big introducing, and that is Zeus had many women, both mortal and immortal. The many affairs of Zeus. The sexual adventures of Zeus, the king of gods, made up a significant stand of ancient Greek mythology. Without Zeus's many infidelities, the myth suggests that knowledge and artistic expression of any kind, poetry, music, drama, or works of art, would not exist. One of Zeus's first affairs was with Mnemosyne, the Titan goddess of memory. After he slept with her on 9 consecutive nights, 9 daughters were born, collectively known as the Muses. Each of these daughters became responsible for inspiring mortals in a particular area of artistic endeavor. Calliope inspired epic poetry, Clio, history, Euterpe, lyrics and poetry and songs, Erato, love poetry, and Polyhymnia, sacred poetry. Melpomene became responsible for inspiring tragic drama. Thalia took charge of comedy and pastoral poetry. Terpsichore inspired dance, and Urania, astronomy. All through the classical period, musicians and poets called on the Muses for assistance as they worked. "Blessed is he whom the Muses love," said the Greek poet Hesiod, after invoking their help in Theogony, his poem about the genealogy of the gods. With the inspiration of the Muses, Hesiod said musicians and poets could relieve a suffering mind of its cares. Hera and the Cuckoo. Zeus's instinct for trickery was an integral part of his character and informed all of his erotic exploits. He had assumed the form of a mortal, a handsome shepherd, to seduce Mnemosyne, and many of his other love affairs involved similar sorts of shape-shifting. Hera, Zeus's wife, had also been won this way. The notoriously formidable goddess had dismissed Zeus disdainfully when he had first approached her, forcing him to take deceptive measures to win her affections. First he summoned a thunderstorm, then he stood outside her window and took on the form of Fledgling Cuckoo, its expression helpless and its feathers ruffled up as if chilled and battered by the wind-blown hail. Hera could not bear to see this tiny creature suffering. That is such a low-hanging fruit, Zeus, even for you. She cupped the cuckoo in her hand and placed it inside her dress against her bosom so that it could get warm. At this point, Zeus assumed his normal quasi-human form and seduced her. The conquest of Hera was not the only time Zeus took the form of a bird. Zeus took on the shape of the swan in order to seduce the Spartan princess Leda. As with Hera, he took advantage of his victim's compassion. Apparently fleeing from an attacking eagle, he fell into her arms. But when she cradled him protectively, Zeus raped her. In the case of the Theban princess Semele, his choice of species, a raptor, clearly signaled his predatory intentions. Taking the form of an eagle, his royal emblem, he visited Semele and made her pregnant. Dionysus, god of wine and festivity, was the result of their union. Ruined innocence. Zeus's conquest of Alcmene, a mortal princess with whom he fathered Heracles, was more sinister. Excuse me, but more sinister than what we heard? Okay, I guess. Let's see. Alcmene was a paragon of beauty, charm, and wisdom. She was betrothed to Amphitryon, the son of the Theban general. Zeus assumed his disguise to approach Alcmene while her fiancé was away avenging the deaths of her brothers. King Acrisius of Argos was particularly anxious to keep his only daughter, Danae, chaste. He had been warned by an oracle that she was destined to bear a son who would one day slay him. To avoid this fate, he placed her in a cell so that no one could come near her. However, Zeus took the form of a shower of gold to pour himself through the prison skylight. The child of this encounter, Perseus, would later unwittingly cause her father's death. Zeus as a beast. Despite her name, Europa was a child of Asia, a princess from Phoenicia, a region covering parts of Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. Smitten by her charms, Zeus took on the form of a fine white bull and mingled among her father's cattle. Picking flowers, Europa noticed the new bull and was struck by its beauty and its seeming gentleness. When she drew near to pet it, the bull lay down and she climbed onto his back. Suddenly the bull leapt up and sped away across the fields and over the sea, while the terrified girl clung on for dear life. The bull only stopped when it reached the island of Crete, where Zeus at last revealed himself and bedded his young victim. Zeus rewarded Europa by making her Crete's first queen. In time, she gave birth to Minos, the island's first king. Scholars think the story of Europa may have originated in Crete, where the cult of the bull also produced the story of Theseus and the Minotaur. For his assault on Antiope, the daughter of Asopos, a river god from Attica in central Greece, Zeus took the shape of a satyr, a half-man, half-goat who roamed the wild woods. Usually associated with the idea of lechery, satyrs were often depicted with erections in ancient art. Zeus has disguised his identity but not his lust. My gosh. hiding from Hera. In some stories, it was Zeus's quarry who had to take a different shape. In the case of Io, the daughter of the king of Argos, and a priestess in a temple of Zeus's wife Hera, Zeus transformed himself into a cloud to make his approach and conceal it from the watchful Hera. Once he had raped Io, he turned her into a beautiful white heifer to hide her from his wife. Hera saw through the trick and asked if she could have the heifer as a gift. Zeus had no option but to agree. Hera consigned Io to the care of the 100-eyed giant Argus to watch over. Maddened with frustration, Zeus sent his son Hermess to slay the all-seeing herdsman. The divine messenger blinded Argus with a touch from his kerykeion, or staff. As the giant lay there dead, Hermess collected up his 100 eyes and set them in a peacock's tail. The bird was sacred to Hera from that time on. If Zeus thought the way was now clear for him to pursue Io, he was wrong. Hera sent a fly to attack her, buzzing about and biting her again and again. The insect put Io to flight and chased her across the earth. Io was never to find rest. My gosh, but didn't the fly die eventually? Or is it like a magic fly that never dies? My gosh, that's a plague that we don't want to have. We don't want to put it into the universe. The birth of Athena. Metis, Zeus's cousin, and in some accounts his first wife, wrought her own transformation in a bid to shake off Zeus's pursuit. Metis assumed a series of different forms to avoid him, but Zeus eventually succeeded in catching her and making her pregnant. I am so sick of Zeus. So sick. Nevertheless, Zeus was worried. Metis was renowned for her sharp intellect and willingness, and an oracle had told him that Metis was destined to bear a child who matched her strength and cunning. Zeus, a usurper who had overthrown his own father, was on his guard against this child. Just before Metis was due to give birth, Zeus challenged her to a shape-shifting match. She was vain enough to agree. When Zeus told her that he did not believe she could transform herself into a tiny fly, she promptly did, and was swallowed by a triumphant Zeus. It was a clever trick, but it did not succeed. When Zeus developed an unbearable headache, the Titan god Prometheus swung an axe at his head, splitting it wide open. Out from the wound sprang Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom, in a full suit of armor. She became one of the most important deities on Olympus and the patron goddess of the powerful city-state of Athens. I did know that Athena was Zeus's daughter, but clearly that was not the story that I was imagining behind. Both transformed. In some stories, both predator and prey underwent changes. Zeus again disguised himself as an eagle to pursue Asteria, the Titan goddess of shooting stars. She transformed into another bird, the timid quail, in a desperate bid to escape, and finally dived into the sea. There she changed her shape again and was preserved forever as an island, later variously identified as Delos or Ortygia in Syracuse, Sicily. It was on this island that the Asteria's younger sister Leto was to find sanctuary some years later, after she too caught the lecherous eye of Zeus. Lecherous? Here she gave birth to twins, Apollo, the god of the sun and poetry, prophecy and healing, and the divine huntress Artemis, goddess of the moon. Okay, so all these gods are a result of Zeus's adventures. Anyway, mythology relates scores of Zeus's exploits, highlighting a sexual appetite that apparently drew little censure of ancient Greece. Despite his countless acts of rape, deception, and infidelity, the king of the gods was not seen as a villain. In his dialogue, Euthyphro, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato declared, "Do not men regard Zeus as the best and the most righteous of the gods?" Okay, thank goodness we are changing our subject to Hades. Not that he is much better than Zeus, but fingers crossed. Mighty Hades, who dwells in houses beneath the earth, Hades and the underworld. While Zeus ruled over the skies and Poseidon over the seas, their brother Hades guarded his subject souls in the underworld, the kingdom that bore his name, where mortal humans went when they died. 5 dark rivers mark the boundaries of Hades' kingdom. Acheron was the river of sadness, Cocytus of mourning, Lethe was the river of forgetfulness, and Phlegethon, an impassable river of fire. The river Styx marked the main border between Earth and the underworld. The dead queued on one side of the river and paid the ferryman Charon with a coin to grant them passage into Hades. Because of this relief, the ancient Greeks were sometimes buried with a coin in their mouth, known as Charon's opal. On the other side of the river lay a dark and dismal realm. There the new arrivals had to go through a large gate, guarded by the 3-headed, snake-tailed monster Cerberus. Though loosely described as a dog, this creature was born of the union between a giant snake man, Typhoon, and the man-eating serpent maiden, Echidna. Cerberus turned this same ferocity on those who attempted to escape. Charon and Cerberus were not the only non-human residents of Hades. Nyx, the goddess of night, lived there, as did Hieronymus, a flesh-eating demon, and the goddess Hecate. The Furies served Hades as his torturers, while Tartarus was both a deity and the pit where Titans were punished. Hellish punishments. Some souls faced hideous torments in Hades. The crimes of Tantalus, a Phrygian ruler, were twofold. To test the gods, he had cooked and served up his son in a banquet he was hosting for them. And as the guest at Zeus's table, he had tried to steal nectar and ambrosia, which would make him immortal, to take back with him to earth. For this he was imprisoned in Hades, racked him with thirst and hunger, surrounded by a pool of water, and with fruit-laden branches that dangle inches from his face. When he leaned over to taste either the water or the fruit, they withdrew from his search, driving him into a frenzy. Sisyphus, king of Corinth, had tricked Hades into thinking that he had been taken to the underworld prematurely and managed to get himself returned to earth. As punishment, he was sentenced to push an enormous boulder up a hill. Each time he got to the top, the stone rolled back down to the bottom, and he had to start all over again and again and again for the rest of all time. The Greek afterlife. Hades was not the only realm of the dead. According to the ancient writers, fallen heroes and the most virtuous were sent to the Elysian fields, paradisical islands where they could live in bliss. Neither Hades nor Elysium, however, were representative of the ancient Greek view of the afterlife. Stories about Elysium or the punishment of Sisyphus were isolated tales. There is no sense that the ancient Greeks as a whole believed in a systematic judgment of the dead. Continuing with the Hades adventures. He spilled a pomegranate, sweet as honey, into her hand, the abduction of Persephone. One of classical Greece's Homeric hymns refers to Demeter as the sacred goddess with the glorious hair. Her thick and lustrous golden tresses were emblematic to the abundance of the harvest. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, charged with ensuring that the fields were rich and fertile. Before tragedy struck, there was no winter, cold, or decay. Stolen away. One day, Demeter's beloved daughter Persephone was out with some nymphs on one of Sicily's prettiest valleys. Picking flowers, Persephone marveled at the roses, crocuses, lovely violets, irises, hyacinths, and narcissi, exulting in the beautiful colors and heady fragrances of the sea. When Persephone pulled a narcissus from the ground, the earth split and opened up beneath her. A huge chariot thundered forth, drawn by sable-black horses. As her companions fled, Persephone stood transfixed. A tall, shadowy figure leaned down from the chariot and scooped her up. Persephone's uncle, Hades, had come up from the underworld to take her as his bride. Persephone struggled and wept, crying out for her father Zeus, but her pleas went unanswered. Some versions of the myth suggest that Zeus himself had played a part in the abduction by conspiring with his brother. Hades took Persephone with him down into the gloomy underworld. He promised that she would be a queen of his subterranean kingdom, revered and beloved by all, but she was inconsolable. Demeter's despair. Persephone's mother, Demeter, was equally distraught. Frantically combing the forest, fields, and hills in search of her daughter, she called out Persephone's name over and over again, but received no reply. In her grief, Demeter blighted the countryside, causing the crops to die and all the leaves to turn brown. It seemed as if the entire earth had died. Eventually, the sun god Helios told Demeter that her brother Hades had snatched her daughter and spirited her off to his dismal realm. At these news, Demeter was filled with rage and wrought yet more destruction upon the earth. Hades' abduction of Persephone had set all of creation askew. At last, Zeus was forced to intervene in the quarrel between his siblings. He ruled that so long as Persephone had not taken food or drink since her arrival into the underworld, Hades must agree to release her. A seasonal solution. Unfortunately, Persephone had eaten something in the underworld. Hades has given her a pomegranate, the fruit of the dead, and she had consumed several of the sweet seeds. This resulted in a fresh judgment from Zeus, who decided that Persephone could return to the world above, but she would have to go back down to the underworld and reside with Hades for 3 months of every year. Persephone's sentence explained why, with the onset of winter, the world appears to fade and die as Demeter mourns her daughter's absence. Then, as spring approaches and Persephone returns to the surface of the earth, its fields and forests once again come into bloom. Okay, I think that we have 2 more chapters that are not love story related. The Greek section of this book is enormous, so I feel like it is fair to divide it in 3 sections or 3 different videos. So yes, I think that I'm gonna read these last 2 chapters that are not, again, love stories, and then leave the love stories for another day. A bringer of dreams. Hermess's first day. Hermess, generally described as the messenger of the gods, was that and much more. Famously, he was able to flit from one place to another in an instant, carried through the air of winged sandals that would become emblematic to the god himself. His ability to fly was key to his role as courier. Symbolically, though, the god's rapid travel suggested his quickness of thought and his heedlessness of the normal restriction of time and space, springing into life. Hermess was the son of Zeus and Maia, daughter of the Titan Atlas and the sea nymph Pleione. Known to the Romans as Mercury, he showed his mercurial character from the very beginning of his life, when, according to the Homeric hymn to Hermes, he jumped straight from his mother's womb and landed in his cradle. The young god did not lie there long, but instead leapt out of the cave that had been his mother's refuge. Despite being only 1 hour old, to find and steal the cattle of the sun god Apollo. Hermess had barely stepped outside the cave when he was diverted by the sign of a tortoise. Scooping out the animal, he turned the hollow shell into a sinker. He covered the opening with cowhide, leaving a sounding hole. He then stretched strings across it and built a little wooden bridge to make a world's first lyre. Plucking the strings, he burst into song, recounting epic stories of the world and its creation, of titans, Olympians, nymphs, men and women, and other beings. Multifaceted god. Not yet a day old, Hermess was already a world's first musician, poet, and historian. His multifaceted genius was also capricious. The Homer hymn states that even as he sang, he was inwardly attending to other matters. As Apollo's sun went down, Hermess crept onto the lands of the god and took his cattle, walking the beasts backwards so their trail seemed to lead into the opposite direction. He headed them back to his home. The quick cunning displayed by Hermess had much in common with trickster spirits of other mythologies, such as West Africa's Anansi or the Loki of Norse legends. Despite his love of pranks, Hermes also possessed a capacity for more serious deeds. For example, he is held to have invented the ritual sacrifice when he slew 2 Apollo's cows, skinned and roasted them, and, hungry though he was, left the aromatic flesh on a platform to atone for his theft. The caduceus, the rod that Hermes carries in his hand, could confer sleep and healing at a touch. The 2 symmetrically coiling serpents that would around the caduceus suggested its ability to balance and reconcile opposing sides, whether through changing them from one form to another or through negotiating and trade. Hermes was also believed to be the god of commerce. And the last chapter is Athena presents the olive tree, Poseidon the wave, the fountain of Athens. The Homeric hymn to Athena begins with the words, "Of Athena, guardian of the city, I sing." No other Greek deity was so closely identified with a particular location, nor does any other location loom so large in our modern-day perception of Greek culture. When we think of ancient Greece, its literature, its art, its democracy, we are thinking largely of ancient Athens. The mythological associations of Athens with the goddess of wisdom are reflected in its reputation as a cultural and intellectual haven, full of philosophers, artists, and playwrights. This dazzling legacy arose from the solid foundations of trade and industry, as the prosperity, confidence, and technical expertise of these people came together to make the city grow and prosper. Work and pleasure. One foundation myth makes this connection between beauty and technology explicit, linking the beginning of Athens with the craftsman god Hephaestus. Lame and ugly though he was, Hephaestus was married to the lovely Aphrodite. This union was symbolically suggestive of a marriage of utility and beauty, of work and pleasure that was prevalent in Greek culture. However, in common with other Olympian marriages, their union also featured frequent infidelities. A son is born. At one point, Aphrodite deserted her husband entirely for the war god Ares. After she left, Hephaestus fell passionately in love with Athena, then pursued her and attempted to rape her. Athena put up a furious resistance and pushed Hephaestus away just as he ejaculated. His semen struck Athena's thigh, and she bursted it off disdainfully. It landed in a Greek soil, and there produced a new life. In some retellings, this offspring was Aristonius, born of the very soil, who would go on to found the city of Athens. By land and sea. Athena played a central role in another of the city's foundation myths. When Aristonius was establishing his community on the coast of Attica, he called on the gods for the divine patron to come forward. With Athena and Poseidon both eagerly desiring the role, a contest was arranged to see what each deity could offer to the future city and its people. its victor would be decided, fittingly for the birthplace of democracy, by a vote. In the contest, Poseidon shook the earth, smiting it with his trident and making a vast wave come rolling forth. This was a bounteous spring, but its waters salty. In response, Athena then poked the ground, which produced an olive tree, laden with its abundant and valuable fruit. The goddess of wisdom was confirmed by Cecrops, king of the city, as the people's choice. However, Poseidon's gift ensured that the seaport status of Athens was as important to its prosperity as its fertile fields and groves. Look kindly on those who make their way in ships, says the Homeric hymn of Poseidon. The sea god remain in the city's prayers. Okay, so that was the last myth. The next one is about Apollo and Daphne. I already spoke about it in one of my videos where I am role-playing as a Greek goddess. But we can read about it again next time. And there are many other myths about love stories. Let's just hope that it doesn't involve more of the raping activities that we have seen so far. But anyway, I'm going to stop my reading here, and we can continue with the love stories next time as agreed. I was not impressed with all the Zeus's adventures, as always. I think of him as this kind of, beast of a being. And it disgusts me to the point of feeling sick. But anyway, I hope you didn't. Hope it doesn't do that to you. Or if it does, then hey, it's just mythology, right? Anyway, but I think I'm gonna leave it there. And as always, thank you for being here today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.